Hey there, Pinpoint Players. Tim here with the Pinpoint Player Podcast. I'm joined tonight with my buddy Rambo.
Hey, everybody.
And today, we're talking about Bond. James Bond, the video game franchise. Some would argue one of the greatest multiplayer video games on Earth. But the franchise itself is found a little bit stale. We're going to get into the meat and the nit and gritty of that.
Yes, the meat and potatoes, and discuss its origins briefly, its high points, and just where it sits today.
Yeah, the police would like to join us.
The police have joined the chat.
So coming from this as someone who grew up in the 90s, towards the end of the 1990s, we got the video game Goldeneye, which was a remake of the film Goldeneye. It was a 4-person multiplayer first-person shooter, and you got to follow along the storyline of the film's plot, Goldeneye, starring Pierce Brosnan. It was a beautiful game, a lot of fun. Me and my brother and our friends, we played all the time, but Rambo and I, we got to talking about the actual franchise. I apologize for the sirens. There's something really going on outside.
Perks of doing a podcast in a city, man.
Gotta love it. But we were talking about the perks of the franchise, and we found some pretty interesting tidbits and facts that we thought we'd share with the Pinpoint Players, especially since Goldeneye was such a landmark game for the video game community, and the franchise 007 is notable in its own respect. So to see something so popular decline so quickly can be alarming, can be a good thing. We're going to discuss that.
The good stuff, the bad times, everything in between. We'll start kind of just with a quick origin story. So I didn't know this. This was me just looking this up when I was researching this topic. But the very first Bond game was called Shaken But Not Stirred. It was an unofficial Bond game released in 1982. It was a text adventure-based game. So back when that stuff was kind of popular, on your simplistic computers, it was, like I said, unofficial release. It was developed and published by Richard Shepherd Software and released in the UK for the ZX Spectrum. Don't know what that is. Probably a really old computer. The game is based off the fictitious spy character of James Bond. But then, just a year later, in 1983, we had James Bond 007, which was a side-scroller published in 1983 by the Parker Brothers. You've heard that name. For the Atari 2600, the Atari 5200, and the Atari 8-bit family, Commodore 64, and the ColecoVision. So a lot of old dead systems. And it was originally distributed by Japan, by the Tascuda original for the SG-1000. That was a mouthful. Basically to say that was the very first game, and the most important thing you need to hear is that it was published by the Parker Brothers.
My God, honest to God, did not realize there were Bond games prior to Goldeneye.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I really need to look into this game about the Atari because I feel like I have one. I know I have an Atari, but I don't know what it is. But if it plays that James Bond game, it would be worth looking into. But that's astounding. It's older than we think. There are a lot of things about pre-existing companies, franchises, et cetera, that we don't really learn until later on in life. Like Turok. Turok was done by Activision, and I didn't recognize the similarities between Activision's games until later on when I realized, all these games that have the similar properties, they're all done by the same company. So call it, childish naivete, call it grasping adulthood, but it's a fascinating thing to learn that the industry was founded earlier than you realize. Because I remember growing up, I played Goldeneye, and I said, they should make Goldeneye a movie. Like, it would be a great movie, a 007 movie. And my parents looked at me and go, Tim, the movie's been out for like 3 or 4 years. I'm like, what are you talking about? I played this game like last week. There's no way there's a movie of it already. Then we went to our local video rental store, Video Horizons, and boom, Pierce Brosnan, Goldeneye, right on the shelf. I'm like, this is dusty. There's multiple copies. How is this true?
And that was the funniest thing is I remember there was a little bit of flack for the game coming out a couple years after the movie because all the the big wigs upstairs thought like, oh, the game's coming out a couple years after the movie. Who the hell's
Yes.
going to play this game? Who's going to buy this game? It's coming out 2 years
Yeah.
after the movie. Who's going to remember? It's like, well, it turns out everybody, because the game delivered on everything. It delivered a awesome single player experience, and it delivered an amazing multiplayer experience. And the single player had, I think, I'm trying to count in my head, I think it had between 15 and 20 levels where you can choose between agent, secret agent, or double agent difficulty, and you have to complete objectives based on that. So it wasn't your run-of-the-mill games today where it's on rails, you're shooting everybody in that, and then it'll say objective completed. That one, you have to kind of wander around the level, complete objectives a certain way, and you have to think about the gadgets you use. So it was very intuitive in that regard for a game of its era. And it was the console shooter that set the tone for everything afterwards. Like, everything had to live up to GoldenEye's expectation. It was a mold breaker. And like, yes, there were first-person shooters on the PC, but on the console, it was 110% a mold breaker. And the cool thing, I remember reading about GoldenEye, looking into this and in the past, is developers for GoldenEye weren't industry people. They were just people that this was maybe their first or second like big project, and they delivered. And then on the last second, I think the big guys upstairs asked, is it possible to add multiplayer to this? Because it was originally supposed to be single player. And they said like, yeah, we can do it. And what they did was they repurposed a lot of the single player levels, sectioned them off for multiplayer. And it was a last second thing. I think with maybe like, I want to say less than a year to development time left before it was released, they did it. And it was amazing, because that's the thing. The single player was amazing, but everybody universally remembers it for its multiplayer. Friends, family, screen peeking, all that.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's what I certainly remember GoldenEye for, was the multiplayer. And it was interesting that you mentioned that, because I remember there are hidden rooms in the single player levels that you can like traverse to different areas without having to defeat the enemies.
Yeah.
And I found that out because in the multiplayer version, they remove the hidden doors. So you're able to see those hallways and corners and crevices without the door there. But when you play the single player mode, the doors are rebuilt and you can access them. And I'm like, they did this really neat. I'm really glad that I figured this out. But just listening to what you had just said, it makes sense because they wanted to do the multiplayer very quickly. So they already had the built single player levels. So to either create an Easter egg or to get people more encouraged to swap back and forth between multiplayer and single player, they incorporated this kind of hidden gem that you could, oh, I didn't know I could do that in the first play, the first player mode. So let me go back and restart a file. Maybe I'll get invincibility. I remember talking about GoldenEye in one of the last episodes that we did. We were talking about how grinding, getting better at the game, developing skills, playing multiplayer really helped how to play the first player. And that's something we don't see in video games now too often. I don't believe. It's kind of set on a plot and you got your missions, your objectives. Oh, that's the other thing. Objectives in GoldenEye, like you were saying, we didn't have a bubble that told us that we completed the mission or the objective. In GoldenEye, I remember yeah, exactly. I think it was Secret Agent. The very first mission, you had to plant the bug on the satellite.
That was part of it. You had to plant a bug on like some sort of relay, because on Agent, the easiest difficulty, you just run to the dam and jump off. But on starting on Secret Agent, you had to plant a bug on some sort of screen. And if you didn't do that, it would say mission failed, and you have to go do it all over again. So it forced you as a kid. I remember being like 8, 9 years old, and just used to the idea of like, I'm going to shoot everybody, but then realizing that this didn't beat the level. You actually have to go back and do this, and then going, okay, well, let me go read what this is because this is important. It's like when you start the mission, you have to read those little files to say like what the objectives are and like what the mission's about, because it actually is relevant.
Yeah. I didn't realize how relevant it was until I was looking through and being like, well, I did everything. I killed everybody. Like I won the mission.
I shot all the scientists. What more do you want?
I wasn't supposed to shoot the scientists, but they were working for the enemy. but they would give you those objectives in standard 007. Like you would get the bug, but it wouldn't be an objective to do. So I'd be running around and be like, what's this bug do? Throw it onto a wall and it would just, and I'm like, I don't know what this does. I don't know what this do.
Exactly. I had that. It's funny you should say that because I think the sixth or seventh level, there's a level called Silo, where
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you have to plant this plastic explosive on a very specific part of the map. Except I remember being a kid, yeah, it had the same thing as you. It's like I have this in my inventory and I throw it out there and I'm like, what's this do? And then you throw it out and it says 6 minutes till detonation. I'm just like, what? And I'm just like, huh, that's weird. And then I just shot it with my pistol and then and then it triggers an explosion throughout the whole level and then you die like within seconds and I remember thinking like, oh, that's what that does. And then I later figured out that, oh, there's an objective behind this. And I'm like, that's what it is. Speaking of the plastic dying instantly in that level, the other thing that Goldeneye has that a lot of games just really don't have unless it's kind of a retro game, and that's the point to it, is the idea of cheat codes. The idea, if you complete a level a specific way, you get to unlock cheats. And that can range from Golden Gun, Silver Gun, DK Mode, which was Big Heads. But my favorite and the one I could never get was Invincibility. For that one, I remember you had to beat the second level in less than 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And the closest I ever got was 2 minutes and 21 seconds. Damn close, but I could never do it. And I probably can't do it now as an adult.
Oh, I doubt that.
No.
I bet you could. With all the experience that we've gained, because Goldeneye developed the first-person shooter. It grew its franchise primarily from Goldeneye. And since we've grown, we've played more difficult games. I guarantee you, after like 2 or 3 rounds, hey, Pinpoint players, let us know down below if you want to see us try and do the invincibility. Because if we can get the correct hookup set up, we can record ourselves trying to get this. Let us know down below if you want to see us try.
If this gets enough people like asking for this, or if people just ask us in general and want us to do a stream or a video of me sucking a big one and trying to get this to work, I will do it.
That's right, Pinpoint players. If you can get our Yu-Gi-Oh video on our YouTube channel to 1,000 likes, we will try and get the invincibility cheat on retro N64 Goldeneye. Make it happen, Pinpoint players. I believe in you.
All right, you heard it here, folks. But to the topic of Goldeneye itself, It had a lot of good things going for it for the industry that made it very timeless even to today, and it just was a mold breaker, and arguably was the influence for a lot of future successful games, including stuff like Perfect Dark, including like the Medal of Honor game. Like it was super influential. It spawned successors after that never could hit the same mark, but were still a compelling game in its own right. And I took a couple notes here. So I felt that, so 2 things.
What's that?
There was a game afterwards called 007 Racing where it was considered okay, but what it did that a lot of people don't give it credit for today is that it delivered, I guess, the predecessor for all the good driving sequences that you have in future Bond games, where you have the Aston Martin or the BMW and you're driving through using your missiles to like do the objective and get the bad guys as when you're driving through, I don't know, London, Paris, Hong Kong, Tokyo, whatever, and laid the groundwork for that. So I just wanted to call that out because I found that interesting when I was doing the research. But the other one was, so even though I think GoldenEye was the pinnacle of the Bond franchise in terms of when it came out, what it delivered at the time, World Is Not Enough on N64, I feel like delivered a very good sequel in that it improved on a lot of things that GoldenEye did as far as the franchise goes, in terms of the gameplay ability, the gadgets, the funny shenanigans that you could do as Bond. Like in the first mission, funniest thing you could do if you guys have an old copy of...
This is that game where we went to the bank. Oh my God. So Pinpoint players, you're in for a treat. Right. Rambo's got a really great story to tell.
All right. It's not so much a story and just more of a funny thing you guys should do. So the funniest thing you could do is in the first mission where you're at the bank and you're in front of the receptionist and they ask, "Good afternoon, sir. How may I help you?" And then Bond introduces themselves, like actual voice acting.
Yeah. The name is Bond. James Bond.
Yeah, and then as Bond, you can do one of 4 things. You can either punch her in the face, knock her out, and it's one of those things where it's just completely hysterical because the ragdoll animation in that game is funny as hell. So she won't just go knock back like a few inches; she'll go flying back like 2 or 3 feet. So it looks kind of comical. Another one is you could take out your watch and stun her, and it delivers the same kind of result. Basically, it's as ridiculous as it sounds, and it's. Trust me, guys, it is hysterical when you go just try it out.
The best part is we discovered that by accident. We were just trying to, like, skip the dialogue, so we were just mashing A, like, yes, your name is Bond, James Bond. Wham! Like, my name is Bond, James Bond, bitch. But you not only can you punch her and stun her, but my favorite was sleeper dart because they literally freeze like a piece of wood, like shocked, and then they slowly fall backwards.
They just either they fall right backwards or right forwards, and it's funny. Just imagine somebody standing up perfectly straight and then just falling over without any kind of movement. It's hysterical.
You guys got to look at it. If you don't have an N64, get yourselves an emulator. If you don't have a computer, get yourselves an N64.
Either way, you gotta try it out for yourselves because it is hysterical.
We do have that video on one of our private YouTube channels.
I think it's on the Facebook. It's on the Facebook.
Yeah,
it's on Facebook.
The Facebook. Oh, I don't know if it's still on the Facebook, but
if we can get a copy of it and download it and put it on YouTube.
If it's on mine, I'm sure I could do that.
Download it.
And then, upload it to the Pinpoint Player YouTube.
Yep.
Look for that, guys.
Yeah, we'll look for that. But in the meantime, I felt that Fire delivered a successful sequel in that. So it gave you more gadget elements. It still had a good story. It was a little bit more. It was definitely more linear than Goldeneye in that regard. So in that sense, it was a detractor. But I felt that it delivered something that was very faithful to the movie. It had a lot of cool action sequences, gadget play, and to top it all off, it had voice acting. It was an N64 game. It was one of the first Bond games with voice acting, like actual Pierce Brosnan, Judi Dench, Cleese, like they all got them as their voices to be in the game. I mean, I didn't know they actually got the actual actors. Like I figured that maybe just got some stand-ins to make it sound like Bond or Judi Dench, but nope, they actually got them, and that was actually a really cool thing to learn. It didn't measure up to GoldenEye's level, but I felt like it was a good successor in that regard.
Considering that it improved by adding voice acting, yes, it was certainly a sign of where the franchise was going. The success of GoldenEye allowed the game to develop into something much larger. For those who don't remember, there wasn't voice acting in GoldenEye. It was text scroll. You read it and you had to imagine what they were saying. But
it was early era N64.
Yeah, it was. And to see that develop is a good sign in a franchise. What year was Agent Under Fire? Was it... Oh, I'm sorry, not Agent Under Fire.
World is Not Enough?
World is Not Enough.
Yeah.
What year was World is Not Enough?
So luckily I've got the wiki in front of me to get the right information. So for reference, everyone, GoldenEye 007, the N64 one, was in 1997. And World is Not Enough was 3 years later, 2000.
In 2000. So in a mere 3 years, they were able to license and contract the actors for the franchise of the film to do video games. So the licensing company, thought that the video game would be substantial enough that they incorporated it in their marketing budget, which says a lot over a period of 3 years.
There's a lot of trust to do that.
Yeah, World is Not Enough. Great game.
It was a great game. But if you guys must play it, go play the N64 copy, because apparently the PS1 port was actually pretty bad. I mean, it was okay based on the reviews and based on the gameplay I'm seeing, but the N64 one is the superior version in terms of the gameplay, in terms of even the multiplayer. That's the other thing. The multiplayer in that game was actually still pretty good, because you had all the fun guns and gadgets that you had from the single player in the multiplayer, and it was a fun experience to do with friends, just like the original GoldenEye. So it's another good, lighthearted romp. With that continued success, they went on to the one you just mentioned, Tim, Agent Under Fire.
Agent Under Fire.
Agent Under Fire, but Nightfire's after that. But yes, Agent Under Fire.
God. So many titles. But yes, Agent Under Fire. I believe Agent Under Fire had a car. I believe there were car missions in Agent Under Fire.
Yes, it was the first Bond game where you had like the Bond first-person shooter elements, but you also had like driving sequences too. So that was pretty cool.
I played that one on the GameCube. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
I also played on the GameCube. No, keep going.
But yeah, the driving missions for the GameCube version were a lot of fun to play. I remember them being very difficult. Steering was like still jonky, but the missiles, the guns, shooting helicopters, I thought that was a really interesting leap for the game to make, especially since Goldeneye or James Bond games were always seen as first-person shooters. You just go around, shoot them up, get through the mission. But to incorporate more of what Bond does in the films, it was a good take. I really enjoyed it on the GameCube. The best part of that game, in my mind, were the incorporation of the driving missions because it
It
was
made it feel
new, it was
like
different, it was fun.
exactly. It made it feel like you were playing the Bond movie, basically. All the, Bond being stealthy. Oh, that's the other thing that the series actually did pretty well, like that people don't give enough credit for. The early games, anyway. The N64 to the late PS2 GameCube era, they were very good at like stealth sequences. There were games where you use silenced weapons, you had to sneak around. I remember there were a couple missions where you
Yes.
specifically used that. So that was the thing that Bond was good at that helped influence future franchises. It did that very well to the point where, yeah, that was the other thing that I kind of just remembered now, just talking about this with you. But yes, Agent Under Fire had very much like playing the movie as a video game, and it nailed it. Like from the GoldenEye game to Agent Under Fire so far, it nailed that. In fact, just give people more context. Agent Under Fire, I looked this up, was intended to be a PS2 port of The World Is Not Enough. But then they decided to scrap that and made it a brand new story. And looking back on it, the story was kind of lame in terms of like, it was just kind of generic-y. Like it didn't have that much nuance to it. But the great gameplay, especially with the gadget interactive environments, made it awesome. Like you could shoot, if you shot specific objects in certain areas, you could take down like maybe 6 or 7 enemies at once versus just going in and shooting them like willy-nilly. So
I
it
remember
made you,
that, yeah.
it made you think about like what to do next as a Bond versus just going in and shooting everybody. And then the other thing I'll say, just because that I took here was, so it had awesome, like I think first license menu music, awesome stealth elements, better level sandboxing, better pacing, and better on-rail sequences like those cars I was talking about, an amazing multiplayer with crazy good customizations. And the story, I gave my opinion on the story being, so-so-ish. My only criticism, just looking back on Agent Under Fire, was that I wish the game was longer, because I think it only took 7 to 8 hours to beat, and then that was it for the story.
I can understand that actually. So what was interesting about Goldeneye, and I hate to keep coming back to it, but it is really the landmark, the groundwork for it, is that Goldeneye had all the gizmos and gadgets, but it was also just a marketing tool. After Goldeneye, that's sort of what Bond games became, is just another marketing tool. Do you remember the 24 game?
No. I mean,
Okay,
I know
it
they
was
made a
terrible.
game. I know they made a game, and honestly, it looked like it was bad even back when it came out.
It was terrible. It was really terrible. If there is a pinpoint player out there who played the 24 game with Jack Bauer, let me know because I'm going to take a leap and say, I played it. I played it. It was so bad I forget that I played it, but I remembered that I played it. There were 3 missions. I want to say that there were 3 missions.
In the
It
whole
was
game?
not a whole, like, it was not a great game. I remember getting through the warehouse, and then there was like a 10-minute dialogue block. And then after the warehouse, you chased somebody in a car, and then there was a cutscene, and then that was like 5 minutes. And then you were in the city and you had to stop them. And then once you stopped them, there was a cutscene. And I don't remember any game after that. Maybe it was because I stopped playing, but it was terrible. Companies who make things for marketing don't take the time to put in the quality. They're just on a deadline.
Pump and
They
dump.
don't care if it takes long, if it needs more time. They just want to get it out to make the marketing schedule, which GoldenEye went above and beyond. They said, screw your marketing schedule. We want to add multiplayer, which thank God they did. But the games after just seem to have been, like you were saying, we're talking about Agent Under Fire, and you mentioned how there was only like a handful of missions that you got through in like 7 or 8 hours. It's probably because the deadline was way too short, and the marketing was just like, yeah, screw it. It's just a Bond game.
I think that's the thing. It ended up being still a good game, like, I guess despite that. But what was cool about it, and I honestly think it was an original story in that the other games leading up to that point, and I'm looking at the list in front of me, nearly every other game I can see on here, save for maybe the first couple back in the 80s, all closely followed a movie, or at least faithfully followed it. Agent Under Fire was the first one that I can see here on this list that actually just said, we're going with something completely original as far as the story goes. Like, it wasn't anything amazing as far as story-wise, but it had the guts to go do something original. The problem was, since I think it was originally supposed to be a World Is Not Enough PS2 port, they probably didn't have as much time to flesh it out. But given that it was something original and not closely following the movie, I'm going to say it gets a pass just because the gameplay, it did deliver, and the multiplayer it did deliver, and the interactive elements and the driving sequences more than made up for it, I think, in this case.
Okay. I mean, it's been a while since I'd played a game. My memory is kind of becoming more jagged and jaded. I've picked my favorites and I've picked the losers. So
So what I was going to say next is, because of its success, we got another original Bond story, and this one I think was probably the best in terms of the GameCube era. People could argue is Nightfire.
oh yeah, dude.
From the very
I
beginning,
love
dude,
I
from the
love
music,
Nightfire.
when you boot it up and you have that music, you know it's going to be a very good ride. And
Yeah.
it took the elements that were like kind of so in Agent Under Fire, and it ramped it up, like improved stealth, improved pacing, improved car sequences. The story itself was like it was cheesy, but for a Bond game is exactly what you expected, because most of the Bond movies before the Daniel Craig era were pretty cheesy, and you know what? That's okay, because that's what people wanted.
They expected it. But Agent Under Fire, I remember driving. Oh, it was the gray car. I forget what it was. It must have been like the updated Aston Martin. But
Yes.
dude,
Yep. I think it was the V8 or something.
something. But it was the gray car, and I would always like. I don't know. It was like so great to drive. The rockets coming out from the front. Oh, dude, but Agent Under Fire, correct me if I'm wrong, it had a multiplayer mode, didn't it?
It did. It was pretty
It
good,
did.
but Nightfire's perfected it, because you can tune the bots exactly to your heart's content. So you can make them as hard as you want or as easy as you want. You can make them pick up certain weapons or avoid certain things. You can make them act a certain personality. It was crazy, the customization. It was an amazing game. It was awesome single player. That, again, this is just me. I wish it could have been a little bit longer, but that's okay, because it was awesome single player, and the multiplayer was fantastic, bar none,
Yeah,
at the time.
I remember in the multiplayer, I would get obsessed with the grappling hook. Me and my friends,
Yes.
we would grapple to the top of the roofs and try and shoot each other. And
Just to
as
see if you
one was,
could.
yeah, if one was falling, we would grapple up and be like, "Yeah, you can't get me." We would just Spider-Man all across the map with that grappling hook. It was so fun.
It was a great game through and through. And I will say this, with Agent Under Fire and Nightfire, one of the things that started to creep up with them is, so the games were both great, but it was at this point that they're starting to face competition in the industry. At this point, you had the earlier Call of Duties, the Halo games starting to come out, and basically people's attention were starting to be diverted away from Bond to those other games. That was, in that sense, that was the beginning of the end there, and it only gets worse. And we'll talk about the next couple games that he and I played, and then after that, we'll kind of just discuss the state of things. So with that, I mean, yeah, Nightfire was an amazing ride, and
Yeah.
it's one of those games where I wish I can go back, forget, unplug my memories of that game and just go live that experience all over again. It was
Me
that
too.
fun.
Yeah. We technically can do that since we still have the consoles.
I think I still have
Um,
my copy somewhere. I gotta go look in storage.
yeah, I do too. I don't remember what games I have.
But my favorites, I would say, from that GameCube era was the third person one, where they actually had Pierce Brosnan. They actually did motion capture on his face and everything. They went all out. Like, it was called Everything or Nothing, which is a kind of apropos. They went all out. They
Hmm.
voice acting from all the big leads with motion capture. It had a full AAA size budget to go with the original story. They actually even got a writer who was part of the screenplays for the Pierce Brosnan movies to be a part of this, and it was entirely in third person, so it was a brand new Bond experience. It was the first, I think, third person Bond game since the 1998 game Tomorrow Never Dies for PS1, which was actually not that good.
Jesus. Wow. Dude, this is phenomenal. I did not realize all of these, you know?
Oh
But
yeah, good stuff, dude, out there.
what was the type of game?
Everything or Nothing. And this is my personal anecdotes from it. I thought the pacing was great from like what I remember playing with it. It had awesome stealth and action sequences. Honestly, actually, it's my second favorite Bond game after Goldeneye, because of the awesome single player story, and it actually had a co-op mode. The co-op mode, by today's comparison, was kind of, not much to it, because it was only a few levels, but I remember playing that with my brother, and I had such a good time, and it actually had decent multiplayer, although I will argue that Nightfire's was better. So for me, it's purely second from a nostalgic point of view, and honestly, given the third person narrative where you're following Bond behind the camera, it kind of felt even more like you're playing a Bond movie. So I have to give credit to that. It was a fun game.
I honestly don't believe that I've played that game. I'm trying to think. Everything or Nothing. Maybe, because I do have a bunch. Well, no, because this was past the N64 era.
It came out in 2003, so it's a year after
2000.
Nightfire.
Yeah, it's drawing a blank on me. I don't think I've played it.
Fantastic game, and I wanted to call that out there because, yes, this could entirely be a GoldenEye episode, but we have to give credit to where credit's due to some of these other Bond games that we played that we just really immensely enjoyed. And unfortunately, I think after Everything or Nothing is where things started to go permanently downhill. I think the last good ride for the Bond franchise was, and I didn't play this one, was James Bond 007 from Russia with Love. That was the one where they actually got Sean Connery to come back and voice himself in the game, where you actually got to play the old From Russia with Love game with a couple added elements for fun and action sequences. I looked at the reviews, I looked at the gameplay. It looks fun. It looked like one of those games where I could probably go play it today and probably have a good enough time, and maybe even back then if I got it, I probably would have enjoyed it, but the quality wasn't as good as it probably could have been, but it was good enough for a Bond game. But the problem was two things. You have old man Sean Connery coming in and voicing him as his younger self. And the problem is, at his older age, he had a very thick Scottish accent versus younger when he didn't really have that accent. And the other thing was, the game itself was, I mean...
Would you say subpar?
I wouldn't say subpar. Like, if I'm giving it out of 10, I would give it maybe a 6, 6.5. So, good enough to play it once, but then you probably would never play it again after.
What I think they were trying to do was, I believe that they were recognizing the competition. James Bond started in the late 60s, the early 60s.
1962 was the first Dr. No.
Okay, yeah, 62. So it was before the generation of people who were playing the games at the time. So what they could have tried to do is like, oh, well, we're declining in, popularity, where competition is increasing. Let's revisit some of the classic Bond films, some of the classic stories that this generation may not be aware of. Because I don't know how many people watched classic Bond movies before playing games. I know that my parents and my uncles made sure that I understood who James Bond was by introducing me to all of the old films.
Same thing with my dad. Like, it was cool being a kid and seeing some of the old Bond flicks. I remember seeing, I remember the first Bond movie I think I remember having memory seeing was You Only Live Twice.
Yeah, that was Timothy Dalton, was
No,
it?
no, that was still Sean Connery. That was in the late 60s.
Connery?
That was one where they were trying to stop Spectre from starting a war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union by stealing their shuttles basically out of space, making it look like the other side did it.
I gotcha. I remember that one. Jaws was in that. He was
Nope.
in space. No?
Jaws wasn't there until the Roger Moore era. So Jaws' two movies were, if I recall, and this is me trying to use all of my memory here, The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker.
Moonraker. That's what I was thinking of, because he was in space at one point.
Exactly, yeah. So that's what you were thinking, because, yeah, You Only Live Twice. It does involve space, but it's Moonraker where Jaws is in that one.
Classic. Well, I'm glad to hear that it's not just me who my family was just like, learn about all of these old things.
Oh, yeah, dude, if you're a boomer generation, man, like, you're into that Bond stuff, you're seeing the movies, you're enjoying them, and then the idea of your kid playing the games, I mean, it has to be kind of cool that your kids are playing the games of the movies they saw when they were kids.
I think it just missed the mark. They were going for kind of a rejuvenation, but the generation who would have been excited for it didn't care about video games.
I think it was too late at that point, because...
Yeah.
And I don't think it was because the Bond games were getting bad at that point. I think it's because there was too much competition at the time. Like, Bond was a good game franchise, but it had too much competition. And at that point, remember how I talked about earlier about the good stealth elements that the Bond games had?
Mm-hmm.
I think that I wouldn't be surprised if that inspired Splinter Cell, but now it was facing competition to Splinter Cell and all these other games I'm telling you about. And so it's a rate of attrition, dude, and Bond was losing this, like, war pretty fast now. In fact, just to give context, so I have a list in front of me from every Bond game from 1982 to 2005, the year From Russia with Love came out. There is a game every single year between 1982 to 2005, except for 3 years, 84, 92, and 96. What does that tell you? It tells you that Bond was popular as far as people going out and buying the games to play them. But after that, dude, from 2005 to today, there has been 3 Bond games.
Gee, wow.
Yeah.
That is an enormous drop off, and they don't have anything like microtransactions to keep them afloat in terms of video games. Huh? That's an enormous. So after Russia with Love,
Drop off.
there were just 3 more games after that.
Yeah, because once they, from Russia with Love, I think that's when EA dropped
The rights.
they dropped the rights to make the game, and then Activision picked up the rights from MGM. And this is where it went wrong, because Activision makes Call of Duty, so you guys know where I'm going with this one.
It became a Call of Duty clone.
And that's the problem, because unfortunately, as it was, licensed games were falling out of favor at the time, and Activision tried to reinvigorate life into the franchise, albeit poorly, with Quantum of Solace, but it felt like a run-of-the-mill Call of Duty game with the same third-person elements. And Quantum of Solace was a third-person game, but it was pretty much Call of Duty in third person. Like, I saw gameplay, I saw what the game was, and it just, like, yes, the Daniel Craig ones are more action-oriented than the earlier ones with Pierce Brosnan and all the earlier Bonds, but it's way too much action. Like, it's seriously Call of Duty in James Bond world, and it left a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't even bother playing the game. It just was a generic shooter. Even the multiplayer that it came with was nothing special. Like, after the game came out, the number of people playing multiplayer in their servers just dropped off, and then that was that.
Yeah, that's a shame.
And then they came out with Bloodstone a few years later, which was its own original-ish series, and nope, that was worse. That was even worse.
Didn't even hear that game existed till today.
It was even worse. That's like, I wish you guys could see my face right now, but it's just such a bad taste in my mouth to know that we had it great when we were kids from Goldeneye, and you expect some franchises to change from when we were kids. Like, yes, they can't all remain the same thing in our minds and our hearts, but Bond went from being something that was fantastic to being something that just doesn't exist anymore today.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the growth. Something to become so popular kind of just subsides slowly in society's mind, being replaced by something new. Although I do believe that James Bond will always have a place in history. It will always be talked about. I mean,
Of course.
going from the movies to the games. I mean, first of all, they were novels. So going
Ian
from
Fleming
books,
novels.
yeah, Ian Fleming novels, going from the books to the movies to these games. It's amazing. One that I do want to cover before we get going is the James Bond Goldeneye remake that they did with Daniel Craig.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was about to talk about that next. And
Yeah, dude.
And-
I was hyped because
So was
I
I.
loved. Yeah, I was hyped because I loved Goldeneye so much, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's just gonna be." They're gonna remake Goldeneye, and it's gonna have all new weapons, and it's gonna be the same missions. It's gonna be all the same. It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be great. How wrong was I? Like, how wrong were we? Like,
it's funny you should mention that, because I was going to mention this anyway, but so I kind of forgot all about this until you were just mentioning it. But so the GoldenEye remake, you and I were hanging out one day back in summer of, I want to say 2010, so maybe many months away from when the game was going to be released, and I get a call from my friend Bobby. He tells me that, hey, they're remaking the N64 game GoldenEye, and it's going to be remade for the Wii, like basically in the same company that made the one for the N64. They're making it for the Wii, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is awesome. So we're going to have, new resolution of all the levels we've played as, all the weapons, the objectives, the multiplayer. Oh my god, my mind was racing. This is before the era of when you and I became jaded on remakes being just simple cash grabs. We were thinking that, oh my god, this could be amazing. This could be awesome.
yeah,
And it's like, yeah, it has Daniel Craig in it. Who cares? It's still going to be the GoldenEye remake. It doesn't matter because Pierce Brosnan didn't even speak in the old GoldenEye, so who cares? And then I played the first level, and I never played the second.
I played it through the entire game. It was frustrating. It pissed me off. It was
It made me so
aggravating.
angry.
Yeah, it was aggravating to play the game. Not like aggravating, like difficult GoldenEye was, because I enjoyed, because like I would want to keep playing GoldenEye. But the remake, I was just like, this is pointlessly stupid. That shouldn't have killed me. But
this was frustrating in a different way, because
yeah, this is anger that you.
it was a soulless game.
Yes, it was. That's a perfect description of it, because there was just nothing to it.
Like, we sound despondent, and it's because we were so excited. It was
Dude, yeah.
it was going to be a remake of the game at that point from a game that was 13 years in the making. And I remember all the promos that came out, like they were showing people in focus groups saying like, how would you guys be interested in a remake of the 1997 game from the N64 Goldeneye? Everybody was around the table in focus going, yeah, everybody was clapping, cheering, and everybody was so happy. And then I played the game. I played one level, and when I was researching this, I became upset all over again, looking at the gameplay and seeing what it was. There's no other way to say it, guys. It was a COD clone. Even with the nice graphics and reimagining of the level design from the original game, it was a COD clone. And honestly, even if you look at this game objectively, not even as a Bond game, but just as a game, there's nothing that special about it. It's just a run-of-the-mill first-person shooter-esque game with a couple slight objectives with a couple gadgets. It's okay in that sense, but it's a terrible Bond game because it's soulless. And I wasn't expecting them to deliver 100% to what the original one on N64 was,
Of
because
course.
you can
Of
never
course.
replicate that. If you fight a battle with nostalgia, you'll lose 100% of the times.
Yeah.
But you expect a game that's at least going to be pretty faithful and deliver, a competent product. But this did not do that for either of us. And I can't imagine that anybody that grew up playing the GoldenEye game from the N64 really felt that. And it's sad to say, but this game missed the mark in every way, I think.
It did. The analogy that I'm developing in my mind is like you were given a teddy bear as a kid and you love that teddy bear, like it's your teddy bear, and then, you move on and the teddy bear, just goes into the storage. And then you hear that the company that originally made that teddy bear is going to remake that teddy bear. And you're thinking, yes, I'm going to go get my old teddy bear and we're going to play. You watch them build this teddy bear, and it's like looking at your teddy bear being ripped apart, getting its stuffing removed, and you're like, okay, that's fine because you have to remake it. But then they don't stuff it with stuffing; they stuff it with like
Stuff it with
and
putty.
then
They stuff it with like
yeah, they
trash
stuff it
bags.
with yeah, and then they're removing the eyes, they're giving it different eyes, they're changing the fur color, they're giving it different fur color, and you're looking at it being like, yeah, that was my teddy bear, but now this is a monstrosity.
And it's horrific. That's what we could
Yeah.
say about the GoldenEye remake. And then, if that wasn't the last straw, they made a game 2 years later as kind of a last-ditch effort called 007 Legends. It was a decent enough idea. I'll give it that much credit. It was a decent enough idea where it's like
Sure.
Bond going into a coma and he remembers like all of the big moments throughout the Bond franchise. And you're thinking like, hey, this could be cool because you're playing modern graphics. You're going to play the cool elements from Goldfinger or Moonraker or other games. I can't remember the other few that were in there. So you're thinking like, it's a cool enough concept. The problem was, once again, the story is a disjointed mess. And the gameplay still reeks of Call of Duty, even with the fun gadget gameplay that it tried to attempt. It just missed the point of what makes a Bond game a Bond game. And in retrospect, if I had known my stuff about Activision at the time, and I knew that Activision had bought the license to make the games, I should have seen this was coming a mile away. But I'll admit, even at the time, I was starting to lose focus on the Bond games, and I was getting distracted by other franchises at the time. And it happens as you get older. The things you played as a kid, become less important to the point where like you're doing something else, you're distracted by something else.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you grow up.
yeah, you grow up. But to the point where these games don't even look like the games we played as kids, other than the fact that it has the name. That's where it went wrong. And honestly, From Russia with Love was, to me, the last decent Bond game. Everything after that is just soulless cash grab, as you were saying about 20 minutes ago.
It's a shame because I really did enjoy the premise of Bond Legends because I am a film person, and to make scenes from some of Bond's greatest adventures playable to people is a great way to introduce them to the legacy that Bond had over its entire franchise. Like we were saying, it started off as Ian Fleming's novels and then became films and then became video games. So I'm really sad that 007 Legends didn't do as well because, like I said, as a film person, it would have really like bring a twinkle to my eye to see people incorporate something from the past in their present. With that, I think that the video game franchise side of 007 is in jeopardy. I mean, we haven't seen a game since
2012.
Jesus, almost 10 years. 10 years next year. So, what do we think is going to happen? Do you think there's going to be another Bond game?
So, from the research I conducted on this, so here's what I'm thinking is going to happen with the Bond franchise in general. They're going to be fan-made projects where the fans are going to go recreate the original game, maybe the original multiplayer. In fact, GoldenEye Source is an example of this, where people took the Half-Life engine and
Yes.
recreated the multiplayer levels from the GoldenEye games, and it's kind of cool in that sense. You get to go and play the level design, and you get to play all these funky weapons from the original game, but also funny Half-Life weapons or funny other weapons that come from maybe the modded universe, the modded community. So in that sense, that's kind of cool that people still have GoldenEye enough in their hearts to go and do that. And then the other thing is somebody managed to find a way to take the original GoldenEye game from N64, clean up the graphics a little bit, that's polygons, and they made it playable on the PC where you can download it and use your mouse and keyboard. Now, there's a little bit of trickery you have to do to get it to work, and I'm not going to tell you guys where to go find it because we don't want to get in trouble, but I'm sure if you were to use something called Google to go find what I'm saying, you might find it.
You might.
But to answer your question, I think that's what's going to be now. It's going to be fan-made projects delivering the most faithful things because we know what makes a good Bond game from the stuff we played as kids. And so people more talented than you or I, Tim, are going to find ways to faithfully remake it using the open source engines that exist today in the community. They're going to go make those games based on the funnest memories they had as kids. But as far as a company, a publisher, going back in and making another license work, not anytime soon. I
Yeah.
think as much as I want it to be, not anytime soon. And honestly, you have to make the games in the same way that Avalanche made the new Mad Max game and the same way that Rocksteady made the new Batman games. You have to think outside the box with those franchises. Like, stop trying to follow movies, stop trying to be a cash grab. Just kind of go back to figure out what made GoldenEye so enjoyable. I'm not saying you're going to replicate it word for word because that's not going to happen. The community won't accept that. But you can make a game that has, you have objectives that you have to carry out with fun gadgets, with some stealth elements, and maybe a driving sequence or two, open-ended levels like the original GoldenEye. If you could deliver something like that for a video game, for a licensed product, I feel like that can be successful, but they need to stop with the crappy license cash grabs that they were trying
Yeah.
9 years ago. That's one. But two, they need to just give the license to somebody that's willing to kind of go outside the box on these things. It's like it doesn't need to follow a movie so closely. It can be its own original thing. Agent Under Fire, Nightfire were examples of that. In this kind of sense, you could have your cake and eat it too. And that's what I think. People need to realize that this franchise needs to go a little bit outside the box to be successful again. It does need to be on rails.
No, I agree. I think that it's been kind of encapsulated inside of a box. It's not allowed to spread its wings, kind of to flourish naturally. I would really like to see Bond venture off into more creative avenues. Are you familiar with Batman by Gaslight?
No, actually.
It's an animated movie about Batman if he were in a steampunk era. So Batman would have all of these steam powered gadgets. He has this super like steampunk suit, and it's very creative in that sense because it's a different take on Batman. There's also Batman Ninja, which is an animated movie where Batman is a samurai who has to fight the Joker, who is also a samurai in feudal Japan. Amazing premise, but that's not where Batman started, but it's where Batman is. And I think that James Bond would do just as well. Imagine L.A. Noire, but with James Bond.
Ooh.
Imagine Mass Effect, but with James Bond.
Something sci-fi. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, and I agree 100%. You need to find a way to take Bond and either go back to basics with making it more like that level design gameplay style of GoldenEye, but for a modern era, or just doing something completely different, like putting him up, just smacking him in a different era and just going with that. Because at this point, publishers like Activision, EA weren't doing the license any service. They were just taking something and ham-fisting a game out of it, and sometimes they actually ended up delivering us something good.
Sometime, but
over the last 15 years, nope, nothing.
because we were anticipating the game. We knew what we were expecting because it was packaged in the same type of way. The same old song and dance, just a new label, a new brand. Throw us something different. Throw us something new. See what happens. That's what I want to see.
I mean, at this point, dude, it makes me think that MGM is just being really stingy with the license and just the creativity behind it. But honestly, if MGM wants to make a little extra money from a good Bond game, what they need to do is get out of their own way and give it to a developer that can actually give it some TLC.
Agreed. I'd love to see where it goes. So, Pinpoint Players, thank you for tuning in to this episode for the James Bond franchise. Let us know in the comments down below on our YouTube channel what you think. Give us some ideas for things that we can talk about.
This was our first try dedicating a whole episode to a franchise, and we kind of liked it, and we wouldn't mind doing more. And if you guys have another franchise you'd like us to talk about, definitely let us know in the comments, Instagram, email, whatever you might say. And with that, like we were saying, give us a follow on Spotify. Helps us with outreach, helps us get up there in the algorithm. Same thing with Apple Podcasts. Give us 5 stars if you thought our stuff was good. And reach us by email at pinpointplayers@gmail.com. And lastly, go by our Instagram too, at the same name, at pinpointplayers. But with that said, thanks guys for listening to our Bond episode, and see you for the next one.
Take it easy, Pinpoint Players.